you're 40 years old, or close to it, you have a job, maybe a mortgage, maybe kids. Definitely some sense that you should probably be further along than you are, and every so often, usually late at night, you wonder, how much does the average 40-year-old actually make on the side? Not the people in headlines. The actual average, you scroll past the YouTube thumbnails, the guy in the Lamborghini who supposedly made $50,000 a month dropped the course seller who claims passive income changed his life. You don't believe them, but you also don't have a real number to compare yourself to. So you sit with that uncertainty, and the uncertainty is what makes it worse. If you knew the real average was, say, $20 a month, you'd feel fine. If you knew it was $10,000, you'd know you needed to move. Not knowing means your brain keeps running the worst case scenario. Today, we're going to fix that using real 2025 and early 2026. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bankrate, LendingTree, and others. And I'll tell you up front, the numbers are not what most people think. In some ways, they're more depressing. In some ways, they're like weirdly hopeful. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, side income psychology, and why nearly every conversation about side income leaves out the most important number. If you've ever wondered whether you're behind, ahead, or right on track for your age when it comes to side income, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. If it ends up giving you some honest perspective on where you really stand. Before we get into the numbers, one quick thing. The 40-year-old in this video is what statisticians call a representative case. 40 is right in the middle of the millennial generation, which is currently the highest earning side income cohort in America, which means the 40-year-old isn't an arbitrary choice. It's the most data-rich age to talk about this stuff. So, let's get into it. Here's the first number that surprises most people. According to Bankrate's 2025 survey, only 27% of American adults have any side income at all, down from 36% in 2024 and 39% the year before that. So if you're 40 and you have zero side income, statistically, you are not behind. You are squarely in the 73% majority. That's not a comforting fact. It's a structural one, but it does mean the version of failure you're imagining, the one where you're uniquely behind, doesn't actually exist in the data. But the side hustle slowdown isn't because people got rich and didn't need it anymore. It's because, as one Bureau of Economic Research director put it, people ran the numbers and decided their specific side hustle just wasn't worth it. Here's the brutal stat. Among people who do have side income, the median monthly take is $200. That's down from $250 in 2024. $200 a month is $2,400 a year. Not nothing. But not, life-changing either. 28% of side hustlers earn between just $1 and $50 per month. That's barely groceries for a week. Now let's talk averages, because this is where the picture gets confusing. Bankrate reports the average side hustle income in 2025 was $885 per month. LendingTree's 2025 survey says it's $1,215 per month. The numbers look very different. Both are accurate. They just measure slightly different populations using slightly different methods. What both surveys agree on is that the median $200 at Bankrate, $400 at LendingTree is much lower than the average. That's because side income is ridiculously tall. About 10% of side hustlers pull in over $1,000 a month, which drags the average up. Most people are at a couple hundred. A small group is at a couple thousand or more. The middle barely exists. This is critical to understand. When you compare yourself to the average, you are not comparing yourself to a typical side hustler. You are comparing yourself to a population dominated by a small number of high earners. The median is the more honest comparison, and the median is $200 a month. Now, back to the 40-year-olds specifically. 40-year-olds are right in the middle of the millennial generation, born roughly 1981 through 1996. Bankrate's data shows that millennials are currently the highest earning side income generation in America. They average $1,129 per month. That's higher than Gen Z at $958, higher than Gen X at $751, and much higher than Boomers at $561. So, if you're a 40-year-old with a side hustle currently bringing in, say, $800 a month, you are below the millennial average, but above the median. you're in roughly the middle of the actual distribution, not behind, not ahead, right in the realistic middle of your demographic. Here's where it gets interesting. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks something slightly different. They count multiple job holders, which means people who work 2 or more separate jobs. In November 2025, BLS recorded 9.3 million Americans with multiple jobs. That's the highest number ever recorded since they started tracking it in 1994. 5.7% of employed Americans. The highest share in 25 years for the prime working ages, which they define as 25 through 54, and includes pretty much every working 40-year-old. The rate is around 5.2%. So roughly 1 in 20 40-year-olds works a literal second job, separate from any side hustle or freelance work. If you count side hustles and gig work on top of that, the total share of 40-year-olds making money outside their main job is much higher than 5%. But pinning down the exact number is hard because side income is subreported and undercounted in basically every official survey. Tax data hints at the scale. Schedule C filings have grown substantially. Schedule C is the IRS form for self-employment income, and the count of filings has been climbing every year. But Schedule C only captures people who report self-employment income on their taxes. A lot of cash side work never makes it to a tax form at all. The real number is somewhere between BLS at 5.7% and Bankrate at 27%. It depends on how you define side income. And the more honest definition includes anyone earning even occasional money outside their primary job. Babysitting, tutoring, selling on eBay, driving for delivery apps, renting a spare room. By that broader definition, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of 40-year-olds in America have some kind of side income. The other 2/3 have zero. Let me also flag a definitional issue that affects every conversation about this. What even counts as side income? If you sell a couch on Facebook Marketplace twice a year, that's not side income. That's just liquidating an asset. If you babysit your sister's kids once a month for $50, most people wouldn't call that side income either, even though technically it is. If you do freelance consulting on weekends and pull in $1,000 a month, that's clearly side income. But where exactly is the line between these examples? Different surveys draw it differently, which is why the numbers vary so widely between sources. Bankrate uses a stricter definition. LendingTree uses a looser one. The IRS only sees what gets reported. The honest takeaway is that side income exists on a spectrum, and where you fall on the spectrum matters less than whether you're moving along it. Now let's talk about why side income concentrates so heavily in the millennial age range specifically. There are 3 structural reasons. 40-year-olds outpace every other generation right now. First, the cost of living squeeze. Millennials hit prime adulthood during a stretch where housing, healthcare, childcare, and education costs all outpaced wage growth by a significant margin. The numbers are pretty stark. A 40-year-old today is paying way more for a home in KO terms than their parents did at the same age. Daycare for a single kid can run more than in-state college tuition used to cost. Health insurance keeps climbing. Wages, on average, didn't keep up. So 40-year-olds didn't necessarily start side hustles because they're more ambitious than previous generations. A lot of them started because the math of one income simply stopped working. Second, the digital infrastructure is mature. 40-year-olds came of age right alongside the freelance internet. They watched Etsy, Upwork, Airbnb, Uber, and Fiverr become real economic engines. They have the technical fluency to monetize a skill online without needing to learn the basics from scratch. Third, the trust in single-employer career paths is mostly gone. They watched their parents get laid off in .com. They watched their older siblings get laid off in 2008. They got laid off themselves during COVID or saw friends get laid off during the recent tech contraction. The result is a generation that does not, by default, trust their employer to take care of them. So they hedged. That hedging shows up in the data. Bankrate found that 28% of side hustlers cite cost of living as the primary motivator. 29% use it for bills. 24% use it for debt payoff. But almost half, 41%, in the 2025 survey now use side income for discretionary spending. Not survival, lifestyle. That's a meaningful shift. The earlier waves of side income were about plugging holes. The newer wave is about funding choices. And 40-year-olds straddled both waves. The older end of the millennial cohort started their side income because they had to. The younger end started theirs because they could see the value of optionality even when they didn't strictly need the money. That dual motivation is part of why this age group is the highest earning side income generation. They have both pressure and skill. Now, here's the part that, most reality check videos completely miss. And it might be the most important point in this entire video. The average is the wrong number to anchor on. Completely. When you ask how much the average 40-year-old makes on the side, you're asking the wrong question for your situation. Because the average is heavily distorted by a small number of people running real businesses on the side. The 40-year-old running a 6-figure consulting practice on weekends pulls the average up dramatically. So does the one who built a software product that sells while they sleep. A handful of high earners in the data create the illusion of a typical 40-year-old making $1,100 a month. The reality is, most 40-year-olds with side income are nowhere near that. The median to $400 a month is the more honest center of gravity. And even that's just a number. What actually matters isn't where the average sits. It's what the average tells you about the structure of the opportunity. And the structure is what almost nobody on YouTube wants to talk about because it's less marketable than the dream version. Here's the structure. About 70% of 40-year-olds have no side income at all. About 20% have a small side income, somewhere between $20 and $400 a month. About 8% have a meaningful side income between $400 and $1,000 a month. And about 2% are pulling more than $1,000 a month. That 2% is the population that pulls the average up to $1,100. Without them, the average drops to under $500. Where you actually fit in that distribution matters more than how you compare to a misleading average. If you have zero side income, you're competing for the slot of being in the 20% who do at least something small. The barrier to entry there is, almost embarrassingly low. If you have small side income, your next move is into the 8%. That's where it starts to actually matter financially. If you're already in that 8%, the path to the top 2% is no longer about effort. It's about productizing what you already do. That's the real ladder. Average is a red herring. The ladder is the thing. Now let's talk about the second mistake most people make when they think about side income at 40. The mistake is comparing to peers who are doing it well, rather than the realistic distribution of all 40-year-olds. You see a friend who started a freelance thing during COVID that now does $75,000 a year. You assume you're behind. But that friend is a statistical outlier. The actual 40-year-old in your zip code with your job title probably has zero side income. Comparing to outliers is the fastest way to feel hopeless about something that's actually achievable in a much more modest form. The honest comparison is to the median, and the median is $200 a month. You can probably get there with 1 weekend per month of work if you pick the right vehicle. Look, here's the thing. Nobody on YouTube wants to say the average 40-year-old makes very little on the side. The median is a couple $100 a month. The most common amount is zero. You're not behind for not having mastered this. You're average for not having mastered this. Most people don't. But average is the wrong target. Average is where things are. The question is where you want to be and what the actual gap is. The gap from 0 to 200 a month is small. You can close it in a few months with almost any modest side activity. The gap from 200 a month to 1,000 a month is bigger. That's where you have to start picking the right vehicle and treating it like a system. The gap from 1,000 to 5,000 a month is the biggest. That's where you have to productize and scale, and where most people quit. And here's something important about which gap to pick. The right one isn't always the most ambitious one. If you're at 0 with a stable job, closing the gap to 200 a month is actually more valuable than dreaming about 5,000, because 200 a month proves the system works for you specifically. 5,000 a month, in contrast, is a fantasy until you've earned the first $100. The fantasy is what most people optimize for. The first 100 is what actually changes their life. But here's the math, doesn't care about feelings part. Each gap is achievable. You just need to be clear about which gap you're in right now. The 40-year-old who tries to leap from 0 to 5,000 in 3 months almost always crashes out. The 40-year-old who closes one gap at a time, methodically, almost always succeeds. The difference isn't talent. It's not even effort. It's expectation, calibration. Set your bar at the median first. $200 a month? Boring. Doable. Then move it up. You're not failing if you're at zero. You're average. The system isn't built to encourage you out of that. Your future self is counting on the move you make this month. Not next year when conditions are theoretically going to be better. Now, trust me, they'll thank you for picking the right gap to close first.